So please talk about African spiritual ways. I do not find African spiritual ways to be any more justifiable than any other religion as well. When I did take time to study Voodoo, Ifa, I found them to be lacking in their ability to prove any of their deities or any of their magic actually exists or work. The first thing is the fact that it is a religion that is also based on man making up rational reasons based on their culture to explain the functions of nature, the functions of the universe. That a deity was put in the place and a water deity is put into place in order to understand hurricanes, to understand rivers and oceans. That a mountain deity was put into place to understand the volcano, or that a deity lived on a mountain. To creation stories of some deity who created, or when you luckily have something good in your life come out of what initially seemed to be a bad thing, where like Eshu um, put you in a position where you thought that it was going to be problematic, but it turned out to be for your betterment. Uh, that instead of understanding cause and effect, there's some deity that is at work. When you say that the lightning strikes because of Shango, the warrior, the E5 version of Thor, or the Norse version of Shango, either way, that lightning is produced by Shango, not by static electricity in the air and all these other different things that creates lightning. That rain comes from a god. That droughts come from a god. It is pretty much a man's way of trying to describe nature. So there was no validity there. Whether you have angels or you have ancestors, that your ancestors are doing things for you. Now, I do see how it works with the law of correspondence, that you have the different planes and of understanding, and the higher can affect the lower, and the lower can affect the higher. Uh, in that regard, it makes a little bit of sense, but when it's placed squarely on your ancestors are the ones who's doing something. If you have an ancestor who didn't elevate their consciousness to a spiritual plane, then how would you be accessing that ancestor? That ancestor may be waiting for their next return to this planet to try to figure it out, or your ancestor could already be here again trying to figure it out. Uh, but I understood ancestors as more of DNA. It's the way I took it. That within my DNA is every ancestor that I ever had. So within me, that 25% of me that is genetic, that 25% of them may be in me, or some 25% or lower of them is inside of me. So 25% or lower of my grandfather on both sides is in me. 25% of my grandmothers on both sides are in me. 25% of the great grands and the great great grands and so on and so forth are in me. And being able to access that, whether you talk about the Akashic record or whatever terminology you want to use, the ancestors, that there's a very small amount of their genetic material that is me. That 75% of who I am is based on my experiences and the responses that I have to those experiences. That gives me my outcome. A gentleman on our live today, he equated it as E plus R equals O. Events plus response equals outcome. I did tell him that I would put a multiplier in there and say that is uh, events times response equals your outcome, because the response that you have to an event dictates more of the outcome than the actual event itself. So I do like how African spirituality is more connected to nature, but then it loses itself when it goes into creating these deities that nobody can prove exist, creating these deities that are obviously they are forces of nature at work that had been at work but yet people at that time frame had no scientific way of understanding it or explaining it, and so they made up and created gods for it. So African spirituality, get closer to nature, sure. Eat better, sure. Live in connection with the universe and with universal forces a little bit better, sure. But there are better ways. Understanding the Kabbalion, the seven Hermetic laws, and I like to call them the Atlantean Nubio Kemetic laws. Understanding those laws, that is way better than African spirituality. Understanding and utilizing the chakra system, whether real or fake, but the understanding of the philosophy itself is better than African spirituality. Understanding the philosophy of the Tao is better. A way that can be named is no longer the way. That when a person is in the flow of the universe, that all things will be granted to them because you understand cause and effect and energy and how all things flow and how all things are connected. And you're able to utilize those things working with them instead of working against them. And you're able to manifest a higher consciousness to be able to live a more peaceful and gracious life. I find those to be far greater than African spirituality, and that those to be more real than African spirituality because they can be tested and you can see the results. I can test mentalism and cause and effect. I can test the law of gender. I can test the law of vibration, the law of rhythm, the law of polarity. Those can be tested. And because they can be tested and verified, then they're more acceptable. Of course, there is always something that you will not be able to test and you will not be able to know. If you had infinite knowledge of everything, life will be boring and life will be tedious. And this is one of the great things about not knowing everything, that there's always something more to learn. There is always more room to grow. So you have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.